Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon when you're watching this video lecture. In the earlier session, we discussed about some of the aspects of cash management, also receivables management. Now let us move on to almost the last topic of working capital management in terms of problems, that is evaluation of credit policies. So what is a credit policy? Basically, it is about extending certain number of days or months of credit to the customers. If a particular credit policy is followed, there will be some benefits and there will be some costs also associated with that. For example, if a firm follows a very liberal credit policy, may be able to increase the sales, but accordingly the bad debts also might change. And not only the bad debts, one of the most important costs of receivables, that is the opportunity cost of funds which are blocked in the receivables, will also increase if the credit period is too long. On the contrary, if the credit period is too short, very aggressive credit policy, if it is the policy, then the firm might save in the form of having a lesser receivables and a lesser requirement of working capital. Fine, that is good on one side, but on the other side, customers may not like such stringent provisions or stringent policies, so the sales might get affected. So what is a good policy? Anything which gives the best benefit to the organization is a good policy. How do we know that? By comparing different alternatives. So this is a kind of decision making situation where we need to compare different policies on the basis of their merits. What is the way to compare different credit policies? We can do it on a total basis or on incremental basis. Whatever the way we do, ultimately we need to find out what is the expected profit under each of the policies. Of course, coming from various things like credit sales minus the total cost other than bad debts, including variable costs and fixed costs. Then A minus B is some amount which is like profit before the other items. From that, bad debts and cash discount are also reduced, so that we got expected net profit before tax. Deduct tax, you get the expected profit after tax. This is a common thing, nothing fresh in that. Only is we are separating bad debts and cash discount as two different line items, so that we understand how each policy is having an impact on those costs or losses. But the main point here in this evaluation of credit policies, beyond all the other things, which are all common things which we know, but the new thing is only this, that is the opportunity cost of the investment in receivables, which is locked up in the collection period. How to calculate that is the core aspect. That's also a simple thing. How to compute the opportunity cost? Of course, we have to take the cost of the credit sales. We cannot take sales. We know the reason why also. Since whenever we estimate the working capital, even then we take the cost of sales rather than sales. So cost of the credit sales multiplied with collection period in number of days divided by 360 in general, sometimes 365 as the case may be, into required rate of return by 100. That gives the opportunity cost. So whatever is the cost of credit sales into collection period in number of days. Let us say if it is 30 days, 30 by 360. If it is 45, 45 by 360. Into required rate of return. Let us say if it is 20%, that means into 20 by 100. That will be the opportunity cost of receivables, which is blocked. So what does it mean? If this cost was not incurred on this receivables, if it was invested elsewhere, we would have got some return which we are missing. That is why we are calling it as opportunity cost of receivables. That also has to be taken as one of the costs, so that we get the net benefit in each of these policies. Remaining things like fixed cost, variable cost, all of them we know. We don't need to specially know anything new there. So simple: sales minus cost, profit, profit minus tax, profit after tax. But after that, opportunity cost of receivables has to be also deducted, so that we get net benefits. Of course, in each of these policies, whichever policy gives the better benefit, that will be chosen. As simple as that. That is how evaluation of credit policies happens at a total basis. Of course, it can be even done on incremental approach. Incremental means how much extra that one proposed policy gets over the proposed policy, original present policy. So how much is the incremental benefit that proposed policy 1 gets over and above the present policy, how much policy 2 gets over and above the present policy, how much policy 3 gets over and above the present policy. So always the common point on which we are looking at incremental benefit or cost is present policy. Of course, in each of them, if at all any one of them is giving any better incremental benefit, that will be chosen. If not, present policy can be continued. So incremental approach is simply taking the same things, but not like absolute amounts. Rather, we are taking incremental things like incremental sales, incremental costs, including fixed and variable cost. Of course, fixed cost generally will not be incremental. Why? Because irrespective of level of activity, that will be constant. Incremental bad debt losses, incremental cash discount, so that we get incremental expected profit and incremental expected profit after tax. So rather than taking only the amounts absolutely, we can take incremental amounts also. And then we need to also know what is the required return on the incremental investment. How much will be the required return on incremental investment? That can be found out like this. Cost of credit sales, collection period, same way. In days, investment in receivables, how can we get that? Multiply cost of credit sales into number of days of collection divided by 365 or 360. Then that gives us incremental, that gives us investment in receivables. Then take only the incremental investment, how much incremental from here to here, how much from here to here, how much from here to here. That will be the incremental investment in receivables. And required rate of return will be given in the question. Apply that on the incremental investment in receivables. So we get required return on incremental investments. That will be these three items. And if we deduct this incremental investment or incremental required return from the incremental profit, we get the incremental net benefits. So all the things are same, only difference in the absolute approach and incremental approach is, in case of absolute approach, we directly take the credit policies and their net benefits. Here we are taking incremental net benefits. If the incremental net benefit is positive, that's good. If it is negative, that's bad. But how to choose which one is better? Whichever gives the highest incremental net benefit, that policy has to be chosen. That's it. And how to compute opportunity cost is the same. So this is the approach of solving the questions related to receivables management, particularly evaluation of credit policies. Let us apply the same concept in multiple problems, type situations. Go to illustration number 15. A trader whose current sales are in the region of 6 lakhs rupees per annum and an average collection period of 30 days wants to pursue a more liberal policy to improve the sales. A study made by the management consultant reveals the following information. These are all different credit policies other than the existing policy. Existing policy is already clear. Existing policy is 30 days of credit. In addition to that, if we give 10 more days, plus 10, this is increase in the collection period. It is not the new collection period. So plus 10 means maybe it becomes 40 days. In the case of B, it becomes 50 days. In case of C, it becomes 60 days. In case of D, it becomes 75 days. So these are the new credit periods according to 4 different new policies in addition to the existing policy which is already there. And because of this additional increase in the collection period, there will be increase in sales naturally, because more customers will be attracted and they will be ready to buy from such firms where there is a better credit period given to them. And because of that, the default rate also will change. So what are the default rates? Default rate is nothing but bad debts percentage as sales. That is 1.5%, 2%, 3%, 4%. That will also increase as the credit period increases. Bad debts percentage also increases. Now the other information is given, like selling price per unit is 3 rupees. Average cost per unit is 2.25, that is cost, and variable cost per unit are 2 rupees. So cost per unit is 2.25 for total. Variable cost is 2. From that we should find out fixed cost. The current bad debt loss is 1%, that is existing. Required rate of return on additional investment is 20%. This is important to find out opportunity cost. Assume 360 days a year. Analyze which of the above policies would you recommend for adoption. Which is a better policy, present policy or 4 more new policies are there. So all that we need to do is we need to prepare a statement showing computation or evaluation of different credit policies, we can say. So present policy, policy A, B, C and D. So let us take one by one what are the items to be taken. We are using a full absolute amounts approach. We can take incremental approach also. We'll see that later. So first of all, how much are the existing sales? Currently the sales are 6 lakhs rupees. And how much the sales are going to be increasing? That is given already. So which means for policy A, sales will be plus 30,000, which is 6 lakhs 30,000. Like that 6 lakhs 48,000. Like that 6 lakhs 75,000. Like that 6 lakhs 90,000 would be the sales under different policies. Now we need to reduce costs. For that we need variable cost first. Let us take variable cost. Variable cost, how much it was given as? It was given as 2 rupees per unit. We can do per unit also again. How many number of units is going to increase later? All those things can be done. But simply we can even take like if selling price is 3 rupees, variable cost is 2 rupees. Whatever the sales are, variable cost will be how much? 2/3. So whatever the sales are into 2 divided by 3. Easily we can get how much is the variable cost in total. So variable cost ratio, if you want to take, that is 2/3. So like that, for each of them if you take, the variable cost will be this much. Then comes fixed cost. Fixed cost will remain constant, but how much is that? How much is that? For that, at least one level, we should understand how many number of units are going to be there. Currently, how much is the sales? 6 lakhs rupees, right? Divided by what is the selling price per unit? That is 3 rupees. So 6 lakhs divided by 3 rupees. How many number of units are currently being sold? 2 lakhs, isn't it? That is the number of units currently being sold. And what is the fixed cost per unit now? Now it is 2.25 minus 2. That is fixed cost per unit now, which is at the current level. So 0.25. That will be 50,000. That will remain constant. Fixed cost per unit will change, but fixed cost in total will remain constant. How much is going to be that? That will be 50,000 across all the levels. You have to write it on paper separately, but 50 for all the possible scenarios. That is one of the costs. Okay, we can have some in between intermittent calculations, or else we can just go ahead with other things also. Let us just take profit before bad debts and all that. How much is that? Sales minus variable cost minus fixed cost. Or we can have cost first of all, total cost, so that we can find out easily opportunity cost of the amount that is locked in. So how much is total cost? Variable cost plus fixed cost. So variable cost plus fixed cost, this is the total cost, different levels. So what is the profit before bad debts and all that? Simply sales minus total cost. This is the profit before all the bad debts and other things. Okay. Now, bad debts is going to be different. How much is the bad debts here? Given as 1% currently and 1.5%, 2% like that. Bad debts has to be calculated on what? Bad debts will be on sales. That is the real cost. The current bad debt loss is 1%. On what? 1% on sales. So, bad debts or defaults is going to be sales multiplied with whatever the percentage. In the first case, it is 1%. Then that will change. In the other cases, it is 1.5%. You have to just change the percentage. And in the third case, it is 2, 3, 4 later on. 2% on sales, 3% on sales, 4% on sales. You need to do these calculations. Percentage on sales, that is bad debts. That is profit. Profit is there already. Bad debts is separately calculated. Is there a tax rate or anything given like that? Nothing is given. If nothing is given, it's okay. Yeah. So this required rate of investment, whatever is given, we have to understand it is before tax written, because tax rate is particularly not given. If after tax rate is given, we have to deduct tax also, so that we can compare them. Since tax is not there, that's okay. This itself is the profit. So what is the profit after bad debts? Let us call this as net profit after the bad debts. That will be profit minus bad debts. This is the profit after bad debts. But this is all accounting. So far it is all simple, straightforward things from the accounting and costing knowledge. Now the main point is opportunity cost of receivables has to be found out. This has to be done in working notes separately. How to get opportunity cost of receivables? Opportunity cost of receivables has to be calculated by taking the cost of the credit sales multiplied with the number of days divided by 360 multiplied with rate of return required. So ideally it has to be done separately. Opportunity cost of receivables. But we are doing it here one shot. Observe how we are doing it. Cost of sales, that is total cost, 4,50,000 multiplied with 20% is the required return. That is clear. That is going to be same for all. 20% is the required return multiplied with number of days of receivables divided by 360. So 30 divided by 360 in the current scenario. This is the opportunity cost of receivables currently. Then how much will be that for the next scenario? So here it will not be same. It will be 40 by 360. 40 by 360. Like that for next scenario, it will be 50 by 360. Next scenario, it will be 60 by 360. Then 75 by 360. So what is the computation here? Cost of sales, whatever is that, total cost of fixed and variable without taking bad debts. Bad debts is separately taken. So without bad debts, what is the total cost of the credit sales? Multiplied with required rate of return, multiplied with number of days of receivables divided by 360. That's what we have done. So that is the opportunity cost of receivables. So the net benefit here after the opportunity cost is this much. So net profit minus this opportunity cost also. If we take that, that will be 1,36,500, 140, 106, yeah, 139,651, 138,083, and 131,150. Out of them, which policy is giving the highest net benefit? Naturally, this policy A is giving highest net benefit because it is 140, 106. All others are giving lesser net benefit compared with policy A. So policy A has to be suggested. So you have to clearly write in the conclusion, the management of whichever this company or the trader can go for an additional collection period of 10 days. Now the new credit policy, the better credit policy is not 30 days, it is 40 days. So what is the ideal credit policy now? You have to clearly conclude it is 40 days. Up there it is good. If it is further increased, net benefit became lesser and lesser. So better policy is policy A. That is a total approach that we have taken by taking sales minus cost minus bad debts losses and minus opportunity cost. But this computation of opportunity cost has to be shown in the working notes very clearly. That is a total approach. Now, if you look at the incremental approach, which takes more time. Actually, if nothing is mentioned, you don't have to do incremental approach because it is unnecessary. Every time you have to get how much additional things have to be there. But yes, still it can be done in the incremental approach also. Let us take the incremental approach. Of course, A also will be the same thing, no doubt in that, because whatever the approach is, the conclusion will be definitely same. So presently, whatever the sales are, we don't care because we are looking at incremental. Additional sales only we are going to take here. So additional sales are how much here? As given in the question, 30,000, 48,000, and 75, and 90. Additional sales. So naturally, additional cost will be what? For variable cost, 2/3 of that. Whatever it is, 2/3 of that will be additional cost. Into 2 by 3 will be definitely the incremental cost. Only variable cost will be there. Fixed cost incremental will not be there anything. Why? Because fixed cost will be constant. So what is going to be the incremental total cost? Incremental total cost is going to be same as variable cost. Okay. So that is the incremental total cost. From that, if you take the profit and all, we don't need at this level. We can just take it out. That was only for presentation purposes. Bad debts, incremental bad debts will be how much? Bad debts we already calculated earlier on the basis of this. Again, because you have to take incremental means first you should find out total bad debts, then only you can find out incremental bad debts. So what will be the incremental bad debts here? New bad debts minus 6,000. So let us take that. Minus 6,000 is constant. So 3450, 6960, 14,250, 21,600. These are going to be the incremental bad debts. So the incremental expected profit, incremental again, is going to be how much? 16,000. Sorry, this is profit, right? This is total cost only we have taken. So how much is the profit? Incremental profit only. Let us take that so that we can get incremental profit later. So incremental bad debts, once again, original what are the bad debts for a particular thing, minus 6,000. So 3450, etc. Then incremental net profit will be this much: 6550, 9040, 10,750 and 8,400. That is the incremental expected profit. So that's what it is here. Whatever we already calculated, the net profit, if at all you take like this here, incremental, will be that only, minus original net profit 6550. $9040. 10,750, 8,400. Same things. So if you take total and incremental net profit is going to be same. What is the big deal here? So the only point is showing and presentation. If it is asked, then we better show incremental. Otherwise, what is the point of doing total and then doing incremental? Anyway, you have to do total computation of bad debts, then only you can know incremental. Anyway, you have to do the total net profit, then only you know incremental. So the computation in the form of incremental approach is unnecessary if it is not asked. If it is asked, there is no option. If a 10 marks question is asked asking us to do incremental approach, we have to do all these total things in the working note. That is a better way. Do this total thing in the working note and then take only the incremental things in the main answer. So what is incremental sales, incremental variable cost, incremental total cost, incremental profit, incremental bad debts, incremental profit after the bad debts, all these things are there. Then what will be the incremental opportunity cost on the investment in the receivables? So that will also be same. Whatever we calculated, it will be more or less the same. So opportunity cost of receivables, how much it is going to be over and above the original amount. So if at all you do some different steps also, you will get the same answer. If you just take total easily and then take the extra, then also you will get the same answer. So let us take this way. Total already we know. What is the incremental here? Naturally 2944. So same amounts, 5889, 9167, 13,750. So take these items here as incremental opportunity cost. Then what is going to be the incremental benefit? All of them are incremental. For each of them you have to add one I. Incremental sales, incremental variable cost, incremental. Everything is incremental here. That is the only difference. So what is incremental net benefit? 3606, 3151, 1583 and minus 5350. So definitely this policy D is definitely not good. It is worse than the present policy. Policy B and C are better than present policy, but still not better than policy A. So out of the four, which is a better one? Naturally, policy A is better one, since it is giving more incremental benefit. That is giving 3,606 incremental benefit. So this is the incremental presentation. But again, there is no need of doing it separately, unnecessarily. If it is not asked, straight away we can do this way. It is the easiest way. Taking sales, variable cost, fixed cost and total cost, profit, take bad debts, you get net profit, take opportunity cost of receivables, then net benefit straight away. On the other side, if you take incremental net benefit, that also will be same. Incremental net benefit, if you want to calculate from this, it will be same. So what is the point there? It's a matter of presentation, nothing else. So incremental net benefit will have to be same. 3606, 3151, 1583, 5350. Same. That is the another way of presentation for evaluation of credit policies. So these are the two different ways. There is one more way, that is all not required. If at all asked, then only this can be used also. Expected rate of return can be given, can be asked instead of directly being given there. So how much our incremental expected net profit is there? Incremental expected net profit is 6550, etc. Incremental investment in receivables, that has to be separately calculated. How much is the incremental credit sales, incremental investment in receivables, on that how much is the investment in receivables. So for example, here the cost of credit sales is there already. How much? That is 4,70,000 in this case if you take, and collection period is 40 days. So how much will be the investment in receivables? Investment in receivables will be 4,70,000 into 40 by 360. Then how much is the incremental investment in receivables? From this to this, that is 14,722. So incremental profit divided by incremental investment in receivables, we can get percentage of return, because in that case we don't know this percentage of return. We are finding out how much percentage of return it gives. It gives in the policy A 44.49%, policy B 30, policy C 23.45, policy D 12.22. Still policy A is better. So that is another way of selecting or choosing the credit policies when there are alternate credit policies. So here the concepts and the words have to be very clearly known. In the normal approach, straight away we get the net benefit. In the incremental approach, incremental investment in the receivables is different. Incremental investment in the receivables will be different. How much will that be? That will depend upon how much is the credit period that is allowed. So originally, what was the cost of the credit sales? Originally, how much was the collection period? Originally, how much was the investment in receivables? And on that, over and above that, how much is the incremental investment in receivables? That is 14,722. When compared with this 37,500, how much is this more? 29,444. When compared with this, how much is this more? 45,833. Like that. That is the incremental investment in receivables. That will be in the denominator. Incremental expected profit, as we already calculated, that will be in the numerator. That gives the percentage of return that is expected from each of the policies. When this is not given, when we have to find out the percentage of return, then we can find out using this formula: incremental expected profit divided by incremental investment in receivables. That's it. That is how evaluation of credit policies will be done. How many ever number of questions we do, ultimately the way of solving the questions will be more or less the same, except that some questions may specifically ask incremental. Otherwise, we can just go with the logic and common sense of comparing various policies and coming to a conclusion. Concept of opportunity cost, if you understand, the remaining things are all as given in the question. Nothing to be very structured or nothing to be very rigid about these type of questions. Let us move on to illustration 16. XYZ Corporation is considering relaxing its present credit policy and is in the process of evaluating two proposed policies. Currently, the firm has an annual credit sales of 50 lakhs and accounts receivable turnover ratio is 4 times a year. See, when the accounts receivable turnover ratio is 4 times a year, automatically we should understand how much will be the debt collection period. Number of days we can know. So number of days will be how much? 360 divided by 4. Let us take 360. 360 divided by 4 means 90 days will be the collection period. So how much will be the receivables currently? 50 lakhs into 90 by 360. On the other side, if you know this very well, what is the turnover? It is turning over 4 times a year. So how much will be receivables each time? Simply 50 divided by 4. How many times it will be turning over? 4 times means how much will be the average receivables every time? 12.5 lakhs. Simple. That is the existing scenario. The current level of loss due to bad debts is 1,50,000. The firm is required to give a return of 25% on the investment in new accounts receivables. The company's variable costs are 70% of the selling price. Given the following information, identify which is the better option. Look at the further information. Present policy 50 lakhs. Of course, 4 times is the accounts turnover receivable turnover ratio. And option 2, accounts receivable turnover ratio is different. And option 3, accounts receivable turnover ratio is different. It is less. See, when the accounts receivable turnover ratio is going down, we have to understand the credit period is going up. Number of days is going up. Do we need that directly? We don't need. Straight away we can take the turnover also for the purpose of knowing how much is the accounts receivables. But again, are we going to do that on the sales for understanding purposes? No. On the sales, if we do, that will be 12.5 lakhs. But for when we look at the management of accounts receivables and working capital, for ratio analysis purposes, this is okay. This is average receivables, we can say. But now, when we are looking at cost, we have to take the cost only. So instead of taking divided by 4 on 50, we have to take only 70% of the selling price, because those are the only variable cost. Now another question comes, where is fixed cost? Not given. What we can do? Not there. Where is tax? Not given. Not there. What we can do? So whatever is given, that only we can take. So as simple as that, we have to evaluate the policies here as given in this question. So let us take present policy and policy 1, other policy 1 and other policy 2. Proposed policy 1, option 2, let us say. First take the annual credit sales. Annual credit sales, whatever is given in the question. Those will be 50 lakhs. And 60 lakhs and 67 lakhs 50,000. Okay. Then accounts receivable turnover ratio is 4 times is given. But prior to that, how much is the variable cost? Let us take that. Cost, because since no other thing is given, how much is the cost? Cost will be 70% of the sales. %70 of the sales is cost. Then accounts receivable turnover ratio is given as 432.4. 432.4. No, sir, I don't want to do like this. I want to take number of days. Still, it's okay, no problem. How to get the number of days? If at all this accounts receivable turnover ratio is given, number of days or credit period, let us call it credit period. How to get that? You know that collection period 360 divided by receivables turnover ratio, 90 days, 120 days, 150 days. That's okay. That way also it can be done. Doesn't matter. But ultimately, how much is the amount blocked in the receivables? So that is to be taken. And for that purpose, we can take the cost also. How much amount blocked in the receivables and how much is opportunity cost, we can calculate later. But prior to that, let us take profit first of all. Maybe it's not prudent to call it profit, it's contribution only, but that's okay. Fixed cost is irrelevant for decision making anyway. So how much is the sales minus cost, that is profit, that is 15 lakhs, 18 lakhs and 20 lakhs, 25,000 before bad debts. And then there are bad debt losses. When there are bad debts, 1,50,000, 3 lakhs and 4 lakhs 50,000. Those are bad debts losses. Now profit after bad debts, net profit, let us call it. What is net profit after bad debts? 15 lakhs minus 1,50,000, 13,50,000. Same way, 15 lakhs and 15 lakhs 75,000. This is net profit without the opportunity cost being found out. Now let us take opportunity cost of receivables. We know how to find out straight away. Whatever the cost, in this case only variable cost is given, so we'll take that only, multiplied with number of days of receivables divided by 360, multiplied with required rate of return. In this case, 25%. It was given in the question. Required rate of return is 25%. So cost into 25% into number of days, 90 divided by 360. Like that, if we do for others, this is going to be the opportunity cost of receivables. Then what is the net benefit after the opportunity cost? That is going to be 11 lakhs 31,250, 11 lakhs 50,000 and 10 lakhs 82,813. So which is the best option? Naturally, the policy option 1 is the best option. So that is giving the best net benefit, 11 lakhs 50,000. That's all. So that 11 lakh 31,250, 11 lakhs 50,000 and 10,82,812 or 13 is the net benefit that is going to be received from different policies. So main point is what here, remaining things are all known to us, nothing new. Only thing is opportunity cost of receivables. How to get that? Cost multiplied with cost of credit sales, to be very specific, cost of credit sales multiplied with credit period divided by 360 multiplied with required rate of return. So after also reducing that from the net profit, which is normal, we get the real net benefit. Whichever the policy gives best net benefit, that will be chosen as the best policy of receivables, or we can say the best credit policy or best credit period that can be granted to the customers. That is about evaluation of credit policies. Now moving on to another theoretical but a small problem also is possible to be asked here. But prior to that, how much this receivables can be useful for obtaining short-term finance also? Yes, they are useful for that as well, because end of the day receivables is an asset. Receivables can be pledged with the banks, pledged with other financial institutions, so that by pledging them, loans can be taken. So they can be taken as a security, they can be pledged with any bank or financial institution, and loan can be taken. Of course, if you have 100 rupees of receivables, you are not going to get 100 rupees of loan. Maybe somewhere between 50 to 90% of the overall receivables pledged might be granted as loan by the banks to the firms. That will be generally a short-term loan. Of course, a lot of factors will be there, creditworthiness of the company itself and creditworthiness of the customers also. All these things will be taken into consideration while granting the loan. That is the choice of the bank, but the choice of the company is to definitely try for something like pledging, where they can pledge the receivables and take loan from a bank. That is one type of financing on the basis of accounts receivables. But another popular and very one way latest type of approach for encashing the receivables is factoring. So that is a relatively new concept in the financing of accounts receivables. What happens here is, it is not pledging and taking any loan, or as good as automatically an outright sale of accounts receivables might happen to a factor or a financial agency. So who is this factor here? Usually the banks or some financial institutions. What they will do? They will take over the accounts receivables of the firm, and naturally they will pay some percentage of the accounts receivables to the firm, 90%, 95%, whatever it is. That means the factor is going to bear the remaining 5% gain or loss. So if at all a firm has, let us say, some 100 crores of receivable, if it sells to a factor, the firm will not receive from the factor 100 crores. Let us say if it receives 93 crores only. So that 7 crores is what the factor might benefit or might not benefit. It depends upon whether he will be able to collect from the customers or not. Now onwards, it is not that the receivables are not the headache of the firm. Firm has as good as literally offloaded its receivables, and now it is the headache of the factor. What he will do? He will collect from the customer. Whose customer? The firm's customer. The customer is not the factor's customer. The firm's customer is supposed to pay to the firm. Instead, now he will pay to the factor. So the factor will collect it. Let us say the factor could collect out of this 7. He is supposed to collect, let us say, 100 crores from the customers, right? Because that is the overall receivables amount. Let us say he has collected 96 crores. So still factor is having a benefit. Why? Because he paid to the firm only 93 crores. So his profit will be 3 crores. Imagine if he collected all the 100 crores, then he will get this entire 7 crores as his profit. It's only for understanding purposes. It will not work like that. It's more complicated than this in real life. Forget about it. Generally, from a conceptual understanding purposes, factoring is a kind of outsourcing arrangement by a firm selling its receivables or outsourcing its receivables to somebody else for a commission. And these type of factoring arrangements can be two types: recourse or non-recourse factoring. Recourse means once the firm gives the accounts receivables to the factor, if the factor is not able to collect them, he will give them back to the firm. He will say, no sir, I cannot collect that. You take care of yourselves. Your customers are very sticky. I can't collect from them. So that is a kind of recourse factoring, where the factor can turn back the same to the organization. That is recourse. Then non-recourse factoring means no way. It's one way. So the firm has sold or given the receivables to the factor. That's it. It is a factor's headache. If the factor is able to collect or not collect, doesn't matter. So naturally, who bears the more risk here? Factor bears the ultimate risk of loss if there is a default. Of course, naturally, in such cases, the commission will be high. So the factor is not doing any social service here. He is doing it for business. That is also a kind of business. A lot of financial institutions and commercial banks give such kind of services too, and usually the bigger companies. Otherwise, it is difficult to get the collections also. That much of efficient receivables management also is not that prevalent in India. But yes, the services are given by some of the banks, and some of the organizations do take such services from the banks. Now, what is the advantage of factoring to the organization is to be evaluated. It cannot be just like that taken. Is it good or bad? Depends upon the financials. It does not just depend upon the idea of factoring. Idea of factoring is fantastic because you are getting out your headache of collections. That is okay. But how much, at what cost you are getting out that headache? How much the factor is charging? That also has to be looked at into, taken into consideration while evaluating the factoring proposals. This is the kind of questions that can be asked in the exams to choose whether a factor has to be appointed or not. How to do that? Simple, cost benefit analysis. What is the annual benefit or saving on taking factoring services? First thing first, because you have given your entire receivables to the factor, your credit administration costs can be saved. Your people who are calling your customers, a lot of receivables team, entire those salaries and overheads of those people can be saved. So entire credit administration can be as good as outsourced. No need to incur those costs. So that is one thing which is a saving for the organization, which is giving its receivables to a factor. Bad debts can be avoided, of course, when it is a non-recourse factoring. Normally, when nothing is mentioned, it has to be assumed as a non-recourse factoring. It cannot be a recourse factoring. See, if it is a recourse factoring, there is no use of factoring also. Then it will be purely like an agency. But usually, if it is a non-recourse factoring, the firm has no headache of bad debts. So, whatever the bad debts normally the firm incurs, those are avoided. So, when bad debts is a loss avoided is a benefit. That is one thing. And another very important thing is the opportunity loss that the firm used to have because of the collection period. Now the collection period getting reduced. The interest saved due to that will be also a benefit to the organization. That is an important point. So earlier, when the organization itself was managing its receivables, it had an opportunity cost blocked up in the receivables. Now, since it is giving its receivables to a factor, it is saving. That opportunity cost is avoided. That avoided opportunity cost is the interest saved in the form of reduction in average collection period. So how to compute that? Cost of annual credit sales, same thing, multiplied with rate of interest, multiplied with present collection period minus new collection period, if at all it is there. If at all the factor is giving upfront, just like that, without any change in the number of days, then present collection period itself will be the numerator divided by 360 days. That is a saving in interest or saving in opportunity cost. Anything new here? Nothing new. Same thing. Opportunity cost, how we calculate, the same thing is calculated here also. But point here to be noted is the saving need not be always the entire period. Let us say a firm has a normal credit policy of 60 days, but a factor comes into picture after 20 days only. He will not take the receivables from day one. Then what is the amount or what is the period for which the saving happened? It's only for 40 days. You cannot take entire 60 days opportunity cost saved. So the difference between the present credit period minus the new collection period, that will be taken as saved number of days multiplied with the cost of annual credit sales multiplied with rate of interest divided by 360 or 365 as the case may be. So these are the benefits of factoring on one side, and what will be the cost of factoring on the other side? Naturally, the biggest one is factoring commission. So what will be the factoring commission? Some percentage will have to be given. That will be multiplied with the annual credit sales. That is factoring commission, one of the biggest costs of factoring. In addition to that, the factor usually charges interest also, because he is giving in advance. He is giving in advance some money prior to the credit period being over. So if he charges that interest, that will have to be also considered to be a cost of the factoring. It will be generally there. So how much interest will be charged? That is an interesting point and important thing to be calculated. The amount available for advance, which is nothing but annual credit sales minus factoring commission minus factoring reserve. That is the amount available for advance multiplied with collection period, that is number of days divided by 360 multiplied with rate of interest. So whatever the rate of interest that the factor charges, on the amount that he advances. So how much amount he advances can be separately calculated. On the amount that he advances, how much is the interest that he is charging has to be calculated. Of course, all these things can be calculated from the information that is given in the question. So once you have this annual benefits and annual costs, naturally if the benefits are more than costs, then it is good to go with factoring. If the benefits are less than cost, then it is not better to go with factoring. That's all. Sometimes it can be asked as effective cost of factoring. Then the formula can be used like this: net annual cost of factoring divided by amount available for advance into 100. Amount available for advance has to be calculated separately. So that is the formula, if at all it is asked separately, to find out effective cost of factoring. Usually 1 year is taken as 360 days here for simplicity purposes. That's it. And this effective cost of factoring is something which is useful for comparison with the normal cost of borrowing. If at all the normal cost of borrowing is higher than the effective cost of factoring, then factoring is good. If factoring is costly than the existing borrowing rates, then factoring is not good. So that is the point to be noted. So if at all the firm's effective cost of factoring is more than the existing cost of borrowing, there is no point of going for factoring services. Ultimately, this whole situation is about a decision once again. Should we go for factoring services or not? Yes or no, we have to conclude in the question according to the computations that we do. So let us look at this illustration 17. A factoring firm has a credit sales of 360 lakhs annual naturally, and average collection period is 30 days. The financial controller estimates bad debt losses are around 2% of the credit sales. Okay. The firm spends 1,40,000 annually on debtors administration. This cost comprises of whatever telephone, tax bills, along with salaries of staff members. These are the avoidable costs, of course. That means if factor is appointed, then 1,40,000 can be a saving annually. A factoring firm has, this is first of all not a factoring firm. We have to start with a firm. It is not a factoring firm. Factoring firm comes now. A factoring firm has offered to buy the firm's receivables. The factor will charge 1% commission and will pay in advance against receivables on an interest at the rate of 15% per annum. After withholding 10% as reserve. Of course, you will give it back later, but that reserve will be always there. We have to understand this is a cycle. It is not just one time that the factor is doing. And how many times this cycle will go, that also can be easily identified. Why? Because 30 days is the collection period. 12 times the cycle will go. 12 times the same thing will happen. So every time what he will do is he will withhold 10% as reserve and give the remaining only to the firm. And he charges 15% per annum interest on the amount that he advances. And while advancing, it will not be given in the question. We have to understand there will be brokerage or commission also reduced. So the amount of advance that will be given by factor at any time to the company will be whatever the amount of receivables minus of amount of commission minus of any reserve that is kept by the factor. Remaining only will be advanced by the factor. Analyze what should the firm do. Assume 360 days in a year. So for general understanding, let us just understand first of all how much will be the amount that will be advanced by the factor. What is the average level of receivables each time, each cycle? 30 lakhs. How do we know that? 360 lakhs into 30 by 360, that is 30 lakhs. Factoring commission is 1%, means each time 30,000. So this is not per annum. We have to be very clear. 30 lakhs like that, 12 times it happens. So like that same way factoring commission also will have to be given 12 times. But each time how much? Each time 30,000. That is factoring commission. Reserve will be how much each time? Each time 10% of 30 lakhs, that is 3 lakhs. So total of these two is 3 lakhs 30,000. Whether the factor will give entire 30 lakhs? No, he will not give that. How much he will give? He will give only 30 lakhs minus of 3 lakhs minus of 30,000. All of them will be withheld by him. So what is the total here? That is going to be 26 lakhs 70,000. Now that also he will not give. 26 lakhs 70,000 also he will not give. He will withhold the interest also on the basis of 15% per annum for only 30 days in this case. So if you calculate the interest just for computation purposes, 26 lakhs 70,000 he is supposed to give, but he will charge interest on that 15%, but that 15% is per annum. Now it is only 30 days, so 30 by 360, that means 33,375 interest he will withhold, net amount of advance that he will give to the firm is only 26,36,625. Like that, how many times he will do? That we have to keep in mind. That he will do 12 times in the year, not once. Factoring does not mean one shot he will give 360 crores or one shot he will give for the entire sales. No. As and when the debtors are happening, then only he will give. So on an average, debtors are 30 lakhs. So on an average, the factoring commission for each cycle will be 30,000 and reserve will be 3 lakhs. So he will withhold 3 lakhs, he will withhold 30,000. On 26 lakhs 70,000, he is supposed to give the real advance. But he will charge interest on 26 lakhs 70,000 because that is the money he is giving. On that, 15% interest for 30 days if you take, the real advance that he gives is only 26 lakhs 36,625. This is the way to calculate amount of advance available. But anyway, that is not the purpose here. In this question, even if we don't do that also, we can still do the question because other details are anyway available. How much is the benefit and how much is the cost? All of them can be separately known on an annual basis. Whenever we look at the advance available, that is a one cycle only. But on an annual basis, what are the benefits? On an annual basis, what are the costs? Those things can be easily found out. So let us find out those things one by one. What is the benefits? First thing, benefits. Administration cost saved, right? Administration cost saved, right? It is given that 1,40,000 rupees can be saved on debtors administration. So that is saved. That is one thing. And bad debt losses can be now avoided. Bad debt losses, 2% of credit sales. So on an annual basis, how much will be that? 3 lakhs 60,000. Bad debt losses avoided, we can say. Bad debt losses avoided will be how much? On an annual basis, 360 lakhs into 2%. So 7 lakhs 20,000 can be saved. So what is the total benefit here? Total benefit is going to be 8 lakhs 60,000. Leave it aside. What are the costs of factoring? What will be the cost of factoring? First thing is factoring commission. Factor commission will be how much? 1% straight away. 1% on the credit sales. So 360 lakhs into 1%. 360 lakhs into 1%. 3 lakhs 60,000 is a factoring commission. You can understand this way also. 30,000 into 12. 30,000 into 12. That is 3 lakh 60,000. 30,000 each time. For a year, 3 lakh 60,000 is going to be the factoring commission. This is not a cost. This is only a reserve. Understand that. This 3 lakhs is not a cost. Factoring commission is a cost. And what else is also a cost? Interest is a cost. Interest is also a cost. How much is the interest? That we have already calculated. This 33,375. Like that, how many times it has to be paid? That will be paid 12 times. So, interest. So that interest calculation, once you have that, 33,375 into 12. That is simple. 4 lakhs 500. That's it. That will be the total of costs. That is how much? 7,60,500. So what is the benefit? Net benefit or cost? Net is benefit only. In this case, 860 minus 760,500. 99,500 is the net benefit from the factoring. So naturally, it is better to go for factoring services. The proposal of the factor should be accepted by the firm. Like that, the benefits and costs of factoring can be compared, and if the net benefits are there to the firm, the factoring contract is good. If not, it is not good. That is the way a decision on factoring has to be taken. For this purpose, the cost saved in the administration is directly given in the question. Bad debt losses can be directly calculated annually. Factoring commission also can be calculated annually, but only interest is the main thing. This is the calculation which is more important here. So 33,375, how do we calculate every time? How do we calculate that? That requires how much is the amount that each time the company is getting from the factor. How do we know that? That can be taken by taking how much is the first of all, debtors 30 lakhs minus commission, that is 1% on that, minus 3 lakhs, that is 10% reserve. So 26 lakhs 70,000 is only advanced. On that 15% per annum, but here it's only for 30 days. So 15% into 30 by 360 will be this. On the other side, straight away can we take this 26 lakh 70,000 into 15%? Of course, yes. Each time how much the firm is getting? 26 lakhs 70,000 into 15% per annum. Same amount will come. But still, you should understand it carefully. Each time the interest charged is 33,375, annual interest charged is 4 lakhs 500. Both are different. So that is how factoring arrangement can be evaluated and a decision can be taken whether to accept it or not. That is one more aspect of the receivables management. And another aspect in the receivables management and one of the types of financing is basically forfeiting. It is like relinquishing a right. That is one of the common things. What is the way this forfeiting happens is through a letter of credit. So LC it is popularly called, LOC sometimes some people call it, but LC is what it is usually used. So when you go to any bank next time or whenever you encounter this word LC, understand that they are talking about letter of credit. So how this letter of credit works, everybody should know, particularly when if at all we are dealing with clients with export-import business. So how this works is basically like this. When the exporter sells the goods or services to the overseas buyer, and the overseas buyer, naturally who is the importer, will draw a letter of credit through its bank. So who is actually giving a letter of credit or a kind of guarantee to this overseas buyer is the bank of the importer. So importer's bank is giving a letter of credit to the importer, and that importer gives this to exporter. And he, who is receiving the letter of credit now? That is exporter. He will approach to his bank, who is exporter's bank, and the bank of the exporter will buy this letter of credit, and immediately it provides the amount to the exporter. The export and import has not yet happened. Only the exporter has received the letter of credit from the bank of the importer. But the exporter can sell that letter of credit to his bank and get the money from his bank immediately. So this is another way of financing only. When this all happens naturally, well and good, everything is okay. But if those LCs are fake, like in the case of Nirav Modi, then the problem comes. Then the exporters will naturally ask the importer's bank. Okay, it's a different story. The word used there in case of Nirav Modi's situation is a letter of undertaking. It was used. Whatever the name it is, simply the concept is same. The letter of undertaking, whatever it is called, it doesn't matter. It's a LC basically, letter of credit. So what happened there? This is what happened there. Punjab National Bank has given a letter of undertaking to Nirav Modi, who is the importer of diamonds. Who gave the guarantee here? It's like a guarantee. You call it bank guarantee, you call it letter of credit, you call it letter of undertaking, whatever the name you give it, concept is same. But all are not same. They are little different. Only they are used in different contexts. Contexts differ does not mean concept will be same. Concept will be different. Concept will be still same. Test cricket, one day cricket, 2020, doesn't matter. Cricket is cricket. That is the concept. But the way and the pitch and the dressing things and all those things will change. So same way, whatever the name we call it, let us call it letter of credit only for convenience, because that is a more popular thing. So the importer Nirav Modi approached PNB for giving letter of credit. Let us say, just for understanding purposes, some 100 crores worth of letter of credit PNB has given to Nirav Modi, who is the importer of diamonds. So this Nirav Modi naturally gives this letter of credit to the exporter, who must be somewhere in South Africa or London somewhere. And once this Nirav Modi imports these diamonds and sells them, and once he completes all the business and makes profit out of that, what he will do is he will cancel this LC and pay the real amount to the exporter. This is what happens. But in the meantime, what the exporter would have done? In the meantime, the exporter would have sold this letter of undertaking to the exporter's bank somewhere. So if Nirav Modi really pays this money to the exporter, then there is no problem at all. The bank, which is our bank PNB, or Exporters Bank, whichever bank it is, let us say Citibank or someone, both the banks are safe as long as this business is going on well and as long as the importer is really paying the exporter when the time comes. But what happened is, instead of paying the exporter directly and instead of paying the bills directly, what Nirav Modi continued to do, according to the information in the published newspapers, is he kept on increasing this 100 with another 100. Let us say the time has come to pay this 100 to the exporter. But then he didn't pay that. So what he did, he raised another letter of undertaking of 100. So this exporter again discounted that or sold that. So the original letter of credit got cancelled and a new letter of credit is given. So like that, it kept on increasing to thousands of crores. So the real settlement of this never happened. Import export really happened or not, God knows. But the business definitely was conducted, profit was made by this importer. But when the situation is like this, the exporters who really wanted money, when the time came where the importer, the Nirav Modi, said, I don't have money, whom the exporters will ask? Naturally, the bank which has guaranteed that payment, that is PNB. So that is where the thousands of crores of liability has really materialized for PNB. Till that time, what was that for PNB? That is a contingent liability. That is a big problem with this. Contingent liabilities are, of course, to be audited very carefully, but in this case, they were not, and they are out of the balance sheet. We know that contingent liabilities are off balance sheet items. For PNB, as long as there is no uh, real demand from the exporter or the exporter's bank, there is no liability. It is only a contingent liability. When the liability of the PNB will materialize, only when Nirav Modi defaults. He did that. He defaulted. He defaulted to the exporters. So naturally, the exporters or the exporters' banks will come to PNB and ask, "Give my money because you guaranteed him. On your guarantee, we supplied him diamonds. On your guarantee, my customer, the exporter, supplied diamonds. On your guarantee, I purchased that letter of undertaking or letter of credit, and I gave money to my customer who is exporter." Like this, the bank will ask, exporters bank will ask PNB. If that second level thing did not happen, exporter will ask PNB because PNB has given the document. It has promised the other party that I will pay, I owe you, I will pay. So in case if the Nirav Modi does not pay, that guarantee was invoked when the original person did not pay. So thousands of crores of problem or burden has fallen on PNB, which was originally a contingent liability, now materialized as a real liability. So this is how a simple letter of credit kind of instrument has been used and exploited. Because it is not a balance sheet item, contingent liability is just a liability which will materialize only if the customer defaults. So it was not much into scrutiny. So this loophole was used in that Nirav Modi's diamond import and export, whatever happened in that scam. This is what happened. So this is the other side of the story. Some people exploit such things, but in the world, the entire import export trade happens on this only. So the point of trust is different. Point of trust is no importer trusts the exporter, no exporter trusts the importer. Why? Because both are in different countries. The importer, let us say, if he pays money, what if the exporter doesn't give the goods? Problem. On the other side, exporter sends the goods, importer doesn't pay money later. Problem. So who is guaranteeing for them ultimately? So there is a banker for exporter also, there is a banker for importer also. They are the ones who are guaranteeing, and the importer's bank will give letter of credit, and that will be taken by the exporter, and the exporter will get the money from the exporter's bank, and immediately he can get the cash without even the export actually to happen, without even the importer has to really pay. If this all goes well, which generally goes well throughout the international trade, most of the international trade happens like this only. 90% of the international trade happens like that. Without that, no export, import, no international trade can happen. But things normally will be okay when some person strangely defaults or comes out of his commitments. Naturally, there will be a problem. For somebody, there will be a problem. In this case, it was a problem for Punjab National Bank. That's it. That is a letter of credit and how it works for import-export businesses. And that can be like a theory question. Don't write all the Nirav Modi stories and all. Just as a theory question, it can be asked. What is forfeiting? The moment when the forfeiting is asked, that automatically means that is a part of the letter of credit. So basically, it is the exim buyer's credit. You can go through this diagram also how this works. Okay, that is for theoretical purposes. And other types of innovations in receivable management are there. You can generally go through them, nothing special. A lot of new technologies like e-commerce are useful. All these things are useful in collection of receivables in a quicker and efficient manner. Again, theoretical things are there. In working capital management, the theory is vast, and that is more realistic in nature, in the sense that is all useful, but in real life, in particular companies, when these receivables really are managed. And another theoretical question, also sometimes a question on problems can be asked, that is aging schedule. Aging schedule is definitely a word to be known by everybody. What is aging schedule? As the name itself indicates, this is how it looks. Simply classifying the receivables on the basis of the number of days they are due. Let us say if the receivables are due somewhere between 1 to 30 days, they are falling in this category. Like that 31 to 60, like that 61 to 90, 91 to 120, and 121 and more. Like this, the receivables are bifurcated, they have been split, they are segregated on the basis of the number of days they are outstanding. So how much percentage of the receivables are outstanding more than 121 days? Like that, if the management wants to look at, it can look at 3.1. Less than 30 days, how much percentage of receivables are there? Around 12%, which is okay, no problem. But a major chunk of receivables are between 61 to 90, 60 to 90 days, major chunk of receivables are there. That is dangerous, not a good sign. So that is the situation on 30th June. Imagine what happened on 30th September. Same way, the same percentages can be drawn on aging schedules. Definitely there is an improvement here. More than 120 days debtors is only 0.5% of the total debtors, and also 61 to 90 also is earlier 53%, now it is only 11%, and 31 to 60 is okay. That is now a little bit more than the earlier one. So percentage wise, definitely there is an improvement in the collection efforts of this company, that we can say. Maybe due to better efforts, the aging schedule now shows very clearly that the number of or percentage of or proportion of receivables which are receivable for a longer period, like more than 90 days and more than 120 days, is now relatively lesser compared to earlier. Earlier 60 to 90 days was huge. Now it is only 10%, which is okay, which is not a problem. Now they are all going to 30 to 60. That means the collection is happening more or less. Most of the collection is happening before 60 days. So remaining collection is only happening after 60 days. That means the average receivable duration has been reduced. That's a good sign. That is the aging schedule. If at all a question is asked, that will be a commonsensical question. Just need to segregate the receivables on the basis of number of days they are due. That's it. That is aging schedule. And collection program and all, of course, this is common sense things. Monitoring the state of receivables, intimation to the customers when it is due. These are all the things everybody will do. Email and telephonic advice are reminding. Then taking legal action if at all the dues are overdue, if at all. These are the various aspects related to receivables management. But once again, the core thing in this entire chapter of our subsegment of receivables management is evaluation of credit policies on one part, and second thing is factoring. These are the two cases where the questions and problems can be expected. Theory, anything can be asked. Theory, there is no particular area where we can say this is possible. But yes, important things are definitely there. What is forfeiting is a very popular question. The short note for forfeiting has to be written from the information that is available in the essay material. Same way, pledging of receivables or factoring itself is a thing. If at all a problem from factoring will not come, a theory question can come from that. No problem. Anyway, factoring is definitely an important concept in this chapter or subsegment, we can call it. That is about some of the aspects of receivables management. And moving on to illustration 18, which is also one of the illustrations given here. Read it carefully. Mosaic Limited has a current sales of 15 lakhs rupees per year. Cost of sales is 75% of the sales, and bad debts are 1% of the sales currently. So this is the important data. It's all about the current situation. 15 lakhs is the current sales, cost of sales is 75%, and bad debts is 1% of the sales. Cost of sales comprises of 80% variable and 20% fixed cost. So that is a segregation of cost of sales. Now, while the company's required rate of return is 12% per annum, The Mosaic Limited currently allows customers 30 days credit, but it is considering increasing this to 60 days credit in order to increase sales. It has been estimated that this change in policy will increase sales by 15%, while bad debts will increase from 1% to 4%. It is not expected that the policy change will result in an increase in fixed cost. Of course, it will not. And creditors and stock will be unchanged. Should Mosaic Limited introduce the proposed policy? Analyze. So again, it can be done in two ways: taking present policy and new policy, and or taking incremental. Easiest thing is absolute total approach. When nothing is asked, we can take that. So let us take present policy, proposed policy. Let us take one by one each of the items. Sales. So how much is the sales currently? Currently 15 lakhs per year. That is the current sales, and now the sales are going to increase by 15% in the new policy. That is a proposed policy. So So 17 lakhs 25,000 will be the new sales. That is the new sales. Now, let us take costs separately. First, variable cost. What was given there? Total cost of sales is 75% of sales, and cost of sales comprises of 80% variable cost. See, out of sales it is 75% variable. 75% is the total cost of sales. On that 80% means directly we can take variable cost sales into 75% is cost of sales. In that 80% is variable cost. 9 lakhs. Naturally, it will be 10 lakhs 35,000 in the second scenario. Whatever the sales now are, 17 lakhs 25,000 into 75%, and on that 80% is variable cost. Now, 20% is fixed cost currently. Fixed cost currently is 20%. Of course, it will not change later. So how much will be the fixed cost naturally currently? Sales into 75% is the total cost of sales into 20% is fixed cost. Now 2,25,000 will not change. It will be same. So because sales change, fixed cost will not change. Currently fixed cost is 2,25,000. It will remain so. So what is the total cost now? 11,25,000. Let us check that. 11,25,000 divided by 15 lakhs. Percentage wise, it is 75%. That's what is mentioned as cost of sales. Okay. Now total cost. Total cost is both of them put together. That's what we are talking about. 11,25,000 and 12,60,000. Currently it is 75% of sales, cost of sales. After also it will be 75%. No, it will not be. Why? Fixed cost remained the same, but sales increased. So 75% will not hold good for the proposed policy. Only current policy, yes, it holds good. So current sales 15 lakhs, cost of sales 75%. Bad debts are 1%. We have not taken that yet. Let us take bad debts also. Total cost before bad debts it was. Now bad debts will be how much? 1% of sales. Whatever the sales are, 1% of sales is the bad debts currently. Now, currently 30 days credit is given. Now it is going to be increased to 60 days. Now the sales increased by 15%. Bad debts will increase from 1 to 4%. Now it has changed to 4%. Bad debts losses are more now. So what can we say as a profit or net profit? Sales minus total cost minus bad debts. This is the profit. Okay, before opportunity costs. Before the opportunity cost, that is a profit. Now how much will be the opportunity cost? Opportunity cost of receivables, let us take that. How much will be the opportunity cost? Total cost multiplied with 12% multiplied with currently 30 days credit. So 30 by 360. Everything else is same. But instead of 30 by 360, now it will be 60 by 360. Proposed, that is. Total cost multiplied with 12% into 60 by 360. That is the opportunity cost of receivables. So the net benefit is how much now? Net profit minus this. Here it is 370,800. So the net benefit is increased. Tax rate and all are not given. So how much is the incremental net benefit? If at all you have to find that out, incremental net benefit is 22,050. That's it. So what is the savings by introducing the different policy or introducing new policy? 22,050. Since there is a benefit extra by introducing the new policy, it is definitely better to introduce new policy. So should the policy be accepted was the question. Yes, the policy should be accepted. That is the answer. These are the various aspects related to receivables management. With that, problem solving aspect of this chapter can be effectively concluded. And there is one more unit 6, that is financing of working capital. Once again, a theoretical chapter and theoretical question can be asked from that. And what are the sources of short-term finance is a very possible question. What are the sources of short-term finance? Say long-term finance sources, equity share capital, preference share capital, debentures, bonds, other things like venture capital, bridge finance, all those things are part of chapter 2, which was there as types of finance. Now, what will be the source of finance for short-term purposes? These are things to be written. Trade credit is one of them. Trade credit is basically taking the credit from suppliers. Bills payable is another way, because we just give the bill, but we are not paying cash yet. That is giving us some cushion time. Accrued expenses or outstanding expenses is something. These are some of the spontaneous sources of short-term finance. And some other explicit sources are also there. In that, intercorporate loans and deposits, usually these are called ICDs, intercorporate deposits. Short-term deposits can be done from one company to another company. That is one type of short-term source of finance. But very, very important theory question is commercial paper. Commercial paper is a very important theory question. Many number of times it was asked. So out of this all sources of finance related questions, particularly related to short-term sources, commercial paper is a very important thing. Question wise in exams. What is this commercial paper? It is an unsecured promissory note issued by a firm to raise funds for the short period. So basically, highly rated corporate borrowers, they can use this for short-term borrowings, and that will be like an additional financial instrument for those investors who want money. So when a big company suddenly requires some money for, let us say, 15 days, it can just issue commercial paper like a promissory note, but it is unsecured. It is not a bond, it is not a debenture, it is just a commercial paper for a very short period. And of course, it will carry relatively higher rate of interest, and higher amounts also will be denominated. But point is, this 15 days commercial paper, for example, it can be purchased by those who have surplus cash. So for them, it will be an investment tool. For the company which is issuing the commercial paper, it can be a financial instrument for raising the finance. So it is a very popular and very common financial instrument, or even you can call it as negotiable instrument also, because it can be even transferred from one to other. So the maturity period generally ranges from 1 week to less than 1 year, because it's a short-term thing. And it is usually issued in 5 lakhs denomination. So 5 lakhs, 10 lakhs, 15 lakhs, 10 crores, 45 crores, like that. So usually it will be in huge amounts also. Minimum amount of commercial paper, each commercial paper could be even 5 lakhs. So these are the salient features of commercial paper. What are the advantages? They can be written also as part of the short note, because it can be sold as an unsecured basis. It does not contain any restrictive conditions. And the maturing of commercial paper can be repaid by selling new commercial papers. Let us say after 15 days also this company could not get the funds what it thought. Then it can sell new commercial papers and pay these people off. And new investors will come. So you are only changing the lender, but ultimately you can still continue the loan for source of finance. So that way it can provide a continuous source of finance. Of course, it will not last long. After some time, people will definitely they are not going to subscribe infinitely. Only good companies with good track record will generally be able to issue them, and only such companies commercial papers the investors will subscribe. And the maturity can be tailored to suit the requirements of the issuing firm. It is not a restricted thing like a bond, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years. No, it's a very short term thing. So it can be a tailored maturity date. I want 22 days. No problem. That's okay. It's up to you. I want 41 days. No problem. So there is no particular number of days which are prescribed. So the maturity can be tailored. That is another advantage of it. And it is a very good source of fund. even though when the money market is tight. Sometimes it can be a very good source of finance. And generally the cost of the commercial paper to the issuing firm is lower than the cost of commercial bank loans. Bank loans are relatively higher compared to this. So it can be costly, cost-wise also it will be relatively cheaper for the issuing firms. Of course, they have some limitations also naturally. Every Tom, Dick and Harry cannot issue commercial papers. Only highly credit rating firms can use it. Small firms cannot use it. New firms, forget about it. They will not be in a position to issue commercial papers at all. And they can be neither redeemed before maturity nor extended beyond maturity. So these are short-term instruments. Already everything is fixed in those things, except that the number of days for which it is issued can be predetermined, but that itself can be as per the requirements of the issuer. That is a very, very important theory question, commercial paper. Then other things, majorly the source of finance internally will be the funds generated from operations, and public deposits can be taken. Bills discounting is one of the short-term source of finance. If we have some bills receivable, we can take them to the bank and discount them, like that bill rediscounting scheme, factoring, as we already have discussed. These are various sources of short-term finance. That is one of the theoretical aspects. In that, commercial paper is one of the important things, and other things you can generally go through them for understanding. These are useful, but yes, as I said, more in real life for general understanding. Then working capital finance can be taken from the banks, and a lot of story about the banks is given. Those things are not required. Usually how the bank will give working capital finance. So this is another important question. What are the forms of short-term bank credit? These are the things you have to write. Cash credit, bank overdraft, bill discounting, bill accepting, and line of credit, letter of credit, bank guarantees. These are the various types of short-term source of finance for an organization to be raised from commercial banks. All of them are simple, straightforward to understand. You can go through them. And letter of credit we already discussed. Bank guarantee is also similar, but generally that is for domestic. Letter of credit is for export import. Usually that is a word used for export import. Bank overdraft, cash credit are normal things, we know them. Bill discounting is something we know that. Bill acceptance is little different. Freshly the bank is going to accept a bill from the customer, that it will be paid after some time by the customer to the bank at all. So the company, it draws a bill on the bank and bank is accepting the bill. So that's rare, but still possible. Acceptances are also done. So it's only a form. Ultimately what the bank is giving, loan. Whatever the name you give it, what the bank is giving to the customer here, loan it is giving, but it is not calling it a loan. It is calling different names. It is calling cash credit, bill acceptance, bill discounting, etc., etc., letter of credit, bank guarantee. It is calling different things. All these unnecessary things only have complicated the banking structure also. But still, end of the day, we can't help that. It is what it is. We should just know the names which are there as sources of short-term finance, particularly to be raised from banks. That is the another aspect, theoretical aspect. And there is one more small aspect here for computational purposes, if at all. This is called how the Tandon committee norms have to be fulfilled for MPBF. That means maximum permissible bank borrowings or bank finance. Maximum permissible bank finance. Just all that you need to remember is three formulae. These are the three possible things that are possible. These are the three things. One thing is 75% of current assets minus current liabilities, which is nothing but 75% of net working capital. We know the net working capital already. Current assets minus current liabilities. So first we calculate 75% of that is going to be the maximum permissible bank finance to be given by banks to the companies. That is one of the norms. Second norm, another way of calculating is, of course, the answers will be different. In this case, 75% of current assets we will calculate. After that, we will deduct current liabilities. So that is the maximum permissible bank finance. Another way of calculating is there. 75% of non-core current assets, let us call non-core current assets, means current assets minus core current assets. Non-core current assets, on that 75% less current liabilities. So how do we know core current assets? It will be given in the question. What are the core current assets? If it is given, we can exclude the non-core current assets from the current assets. So we can exclude the core current assets from the current assets so that we get non-core current assets. So let us understand this by some small example, because why we are doing it is only to be in a position where we could not, maybe if a question comes on this, we should not be in a position to leave it. We should be able to solve that. It's simple 3 formulae. They have to be applied. From the data available, we can apply that straight away. 5 marks question if it is given. And if we don't do this, you may lose that. Why to risk it? Simple things. So what are the 3 methods suggested? According to them, what is the MPBF is asking. So first thing first. First method, current assets minus current liabilities is working capital. So current assets is how much? Total current assets is 510 and total of current liabilities is 410. Sorry, other than the bank borrowing. Bank borrowing is already there. So creditors and other current liabilities, other than the bank borrowing, the current liabilities is only 160. So 510 current assets, 160 current liabilities. So whatever is that working capital, on that 75% can be the maximum permissible bank borrowing, which is 262.5. That is according to method 1. Just for understanding, already bank borrowing is 250. That is current only. That means extra what the firm can now get extra from the bank, only 12.5. It cannot get 262.5. It can get only 12.5. That's okay. To that extent, it can raise finance from the banks. So in only method 1, the bank can definitely, the company can raise 12.5 lakhs from the banks over and above its existing bank borrowings, because the total maximum permissible bank borrowing is, bank financing is 262.5. In the second case, 0.75 of current assets, 510. First find that, 0.75 of current assets. 510 into 75%, 383. Minus current liabilities. Minus current liabilities here means only other than the bank borrowings, 160. So that is only 223, around 222.5 lakhs is the maximum permissible bank finance. Can the firm get any extra finance here? In this case, no. Why? Already bank borrowing is 250, which has exceeded the norm. So in this method, if the bank follows this method, it will not lend 1 rupee extra also to this firm. That is second method. Third method is taking only the non-core current assets. So here core current assets are 200 lakhs. Naturally, how much will be the non-core current assets? 510 minus 200. Okay, that will be 310. So 310 into 0.75, only non-core current assets. So 310 instead of 510, 310 into 0.75 minus 160, that is current liabilities, that is same. So that will be only how much? Around 72.5 or 73 lakhs. In this case, definitely the bank will never grant even any credit, because already the bank credit is much higher. So only in the first case, there is a possibility of availing an extra 12.5 lakhs loan, because the maximum permissible bank finance in that method is 262.5, whereas already 250 lakhs has been taken by the firm. According to second and third method, it is not eligible for any kind of additional financing, because already it has crossed the maximum permissible bank financing according to those two methods. That is another point. So once again, formula here, 0.75 of or 75% of net working capital, which is nothing but current assets minus current liabilities. Second way, second method, 75% of current assets minus current liabilities. So this is where people have to be careful how we read that and how we write that. That all matters. First case is 75% of current assets minus current liabilities. Second is 75% of current assets minus current liabilities. That is difference. The brackets are completely different. The first one is 75% of current assets minus current liabilities. Second is 75% of current assets, that is one calculation, minus current liabilities. Third is 75% of non-core current assets minus current liabilities. If you know these three formula, if any question comes from that, we can solve it very easily. But how much is the non-core and core current assets? It has to be given in the question. You don't worry about that. That's it. That concludes the discussion on working capital management in relation to various aspects. Only some of the things related to the payables management is not particularly discussed, because it is not much required also. We can generally go through that. And some more questions at the end of the chapter are given in the essay material. Related to cash budget also there are a couple of questions, and related to receivables management particularly there are 3-4 questions on about evaluation of credit policies. Understanding the same way that we have done evaluation of credit policies, try to solve those questions also which are given at the end of this material. So these additional problems, we have solved the questions related to estimation of working capital, even these questions we solved, but later question number 6 onwards, cash budget. Question number 7 also cash budget. Question number 8 also cash budget. Question number 9 is evaluation of credit policies, existing policy, alternative 1, alternate 2. Same way question number 10 again similar to the evaluation of credit policies, but 10 is little interesting, do that, right? The solution is there. 11 once again is evaluation of credit policy. So these questions you can solve them, practice those questions very well from working capital management. But once again, as far as numerical questions are concerned, this paper, this chapter of working capital management has multiple possibilities. Estimation of working capital, topmost priority, 10 marks. Then cash budget. Cash budget is more of practice, just because there cannot be any special things to be known in the cash budget. It's all about inflows and outflows. How do we know inflows, outflows? Nobody can tell you that. Whatever the question says, that only has to be just interpreted, and you have to use that information for identifying inflows and outflows. If a cash budget question is given, very carefully, though it takes time, carefully if you calculate that, 10 marks can be pocketed. Very possible question on cash budget. And 5 marks questions like receivables management, evaluation of credit policies, or factoring related questions, or even tandem committee norms. These are the 3 possible 5 marks questions. Any of these can be expected. Practice them well. And if any questions and doubts in relation to these problems or any other areas whenever you practice are there, they can be definitely addressed at any point of time. Take care. Bye bye. Thank you very much.